So I'm Sebastian Beswick. I work at a place called Domestic Cat Software. We're a local design and development agency. We build apps for startups and large companies here and in the USA. We're actually hiring iOS and Android developers at the moment, so if you want to build great apps, please come and have a chat with me sometime during the conference. So today I'm going to be talking about requirements, which actually feels pretty weird to me because I'm a programmer. And requirements are generally managed by people who don't think t-shirts, jeans and thongs are appropriate clothes to wear to work. But I've actually taken quite a particular interest in requirements lately. And the reason is that I've had to work on more than my fair share of projects over the last couple of years that would have really benefited from...
Your microphone's off.
Thank you.
Okay, try that.
So, is that better? Yeah. Great. So yeah, as I was saying, I've had the misfortune to have to work on a whole heap of projects lately that would have benefited from some more detailed or existent design specs. So I work as a consultant iOS developer. So rather than working on a single app for a long period of time, I'm often working on a couple of apps at a time with new work kind of always coming in. Now my company Domestic Cat hired a full-time designer at the start of this year, which is great. I love him to bits. He's an expert in mobile UX and he's a real pleasure to work with. But because we're a pretty small shop, we often have to work with digital agency designers. Has anyone ever had the pleasure of working with a creative agency designer before? Yes, so they tend to make me pretty mad. Creative agency designers are often overworked and they're rarely specialists in mobile UX. Obviously, when you combine this with a client that doesn't really know what they want, things can get hairy pretty quickly. Now, I understand that apps are more than just a set of functions. People don't only expect their apps to do what they're supposed to do, they also expect them to be a joy to use. It's generally understood that when you're making an app, a functional spec is required, but unfortunately it's pretty rare to get a detailed design spec. So I put together a specification that we can forward to our clients and their designers that details exactly what I expect them to provide us to ensure that I have all the information I need to transform their app from a very abstract idea into a beautiful functioning product. Now this list of things is pretty big, but I think it's pretty vital that there's a clear understanding of exactly how an app should look and feel before development starts. Obviously people judge apps just as harshly if they provide poor UI or UX as they do if they're functionally incomplete or buggy. So here's the list. And you can see that I asked for quite a lot of information. I'm going to spend the next 20 odd minutes taking you guys through exactly what all these things are and why I think they're so important. Now, having a designer assemble all this information takes a bit of time up front, but it's going to save a huge amount of time further on in the development process for a number of reasons. Firstly, it ensures that I understand the experience that my clients want to provide for their users. Secondly, it ensures that I have everything I need to turn their idea into a beautiful, usable app. It ensures that my client isn't disappointed when I misinterpret how their app should look and behave. And finally, it vastly reduces the amount of time that is lost through me regularly having to get in touch to clarify things that aren't present or obvious in the designs. So now let's go through that list of documents and assets that I think should be provided before development starts. I think the first thing that needs to be mentioned is the basics of how screen measurements and coordinates work in iOS. In iOS, we use two standard units to represent screen resolutions and coordinates. We obviously use pixels and points. Different iOS devices have different screen resolutions. So the iPhone 3GS has a screen at a physical resolution of 320 by 480 pixels, which is 163 pixels per inch, sorry. But Retina displays were introduced with the iPhone 4, which runs at a physical resolution of 640 by 960 pixels, which is 326 pixels per inch, which is exactly double that of the 3GS. So to ensure that interfaces can be defined consistently between the two devices, we refer to screen coordinates and resolutions in terms of points rather than pixels. So both the iPhone 3GS and the iPhone 4 have a logical resolution of 320 by 480 points, even though the iPhone 4 screen has double the physical resolution of the 3GS screen. Drawing a line that's 1 point wide on a newer device actually results in a 2 pixel wide line being drawn on the screen, 1.1 wide. The line's going to look the same on both devices, and this is the reason that we prefer to work in points rather than physical pixels. The Paint Code team have made a great resource for explaining this, and they've put it on their website. In the past, I've had designers give me design documents that randomly flip between describing dimensions in pixels and describing dimensions in points. And this is obviously really annoying because as developers, we only ever pretty much care about points. So now let's talk through the documents that I think should be provided in the design spec. The first crucial document in the design spec is the design flats. As a developer, this is the canonical document that you're going to refer to when you're working on the app. This document should contain an image for each screen of the app with real assets and either real or mocked data. And each of these screens should look exactly how it's expected to look when the app's complete. So as you work through each screen of the app, you can regularly refer back to these design flats, both to the screen that you're currently working on and to the surrounding screens for context. Obviously, I find that having a single canonical source can be a real help in efficiently implementing designs. So this is an example of what design flats for the DevWorld app would look like, and it's exactly what you would expect. It's just what the finished app looks like. The next document I think is important in the design spec is the annotated design flats. So the last document we talked about, which were the unannotated flats, described what should be built. This document, the annotated flats, shows how the design of each screen should actually be realised. For example, imagine you've got a screen that just shows a single label. On the unannotated flats, you're going to get a very broad overview of where the copy goes on the screen. What we want to know from the annotated design flats is we want to really quickly be able to see the properties of the label. For example, we want to see its exact position, its colour, its size, and its font. I consider this document to be really important, pretty much as important as getting the image assets themselves. This document should be based off the design flats, and your designers will probably find that starting with a set of unannotated flats makes it much easier to produce this document. Over the last few years, I've found that many designers want to provide me with just their raw design files, so Photoshop documents. It's pretty unlikely that this is actually going to be very useful for me, because remember that many designers have different workflows, they use different tools, and this gets unmanageable for developers really quickly if they work with a lot of designers, so consultants, freelancers especially. As contract developers, we might have some design experience, but we generally aren't actually specialist designers. And we also generally don't have the background to the app that the designer and the client does. So this makes it highly likely that if we don't have an annotated design spec, not only are we going to waste time trying to figure out exactly what kerning was used in the text in that label, we're also going to miss things that probably seemed really obvious to the designer, like the fact that there was custom kerning on the text on that label. So there are two basic pieces of information that I think we should gather from the annotated design flats. The first thing is the layout of the elements. So this is on each screen. This is how each element should be laid out, both with respects to the bounds of the screen and to every other element on the screen. And the second thing we want to know are the properties of each individual element on the screen. So this is what we need to do to make sure that each element looks exactly the way that it should look. So very specifically, we want to see the following information. First thing we want to see is the dimensions of each asset on the screen. So for each fixed or external asset, we want to know its size in display independent points. For example, if you have a logo up the top that should be displayed at a specific size, that should be made clear here. Next thing we want to know about is constraints. So even if we're creating an app specifically for an iPhone running iOS 9 in portrait mode only, there are still a whole bunch of device resolutions that we need to support. We need to support the iPhone 4S size, iPhone 5 size, iPhone 6 size, and iPhone 6 Plus size. So if a designer only provides designs in the native resolution of an iPhone 4S, say, which is 320 by 480, there's going to be a huge amount of padding that has to be introduced somewhere when the app runs on an iPhone 6 Plus, which is at a much higher resolution. So rather than specifying the raw dimensions of the design based on a single iOS screen size, I think it's much more useful for designers to provide guidelines on how the element should react when they're running on differently sized devices. So you can see here we've specified a whole heap of fixed constraints. This is just in constraints in X. And we've also specified that this is where the growth of the cell should happen. Should always be greater than or equal to 8 points from the chevron, and any text that can't be crammed in there should be truncated. So obviously, as developers, if we aren't provided with this information, we use our aesthetic judgment and our knowledge of the iOS HIG to try and come up with a sensible solution. But often it's not the solution that the client necessarily thinks is the best. And once we've actually implemented this, it can often be a significant amount of work to change designs. So it's really best if this information is provided up front. Next thing we want to know is information about colours in generic RGBAs. So as developers, we could use a colour picker on all the elements to get the colours from the flats, but this is time consuming for us, and it provides a lot of potential for errors to creep in. So it's best to have this specified in the design document ahead of time. An important thing to note is that Xcode uses the generic RGB colour space profile to draw colours. So it's important that you let your designers and clients know to set their design software to use this too. Font information should be marked up in the annotated spec. And there's a few things that we want to know here. We want to know the font family for each piece of text. we want to know its weight, its style, its size, and its colour. And having it presented like this means it's really easy for developers to set details when we're implementing. The next thing we want to know is any external resources that are being used. So you can see here that there's a couple of external images on this screen, and they've been marked up with their file names. Another important thing to note is that it's really good to use sensible file names if you're a designer, and to make sure to include details for example, deselected and selected states. So you can see there may be different images used for the selected and deselected states of those tab bar images down there. And the last thing that I want to see in the annotated design flats are details about loading states. So this is what we should show on the screen when the app's waiting for a response from the API. It's also really handy to give details about what should be shown in response to an API error and what users should be blocked from doing during loading and error states. The next document we want is a screen flow document. As a developer, it's really crucial that we understand very early in the development process how all the different pieces of the app fit together, so that we can ensure that when we create our project and start work, we're laying a solid architectural foundation for the app. So this screen flow document should show all the different ways that users can navigate between screens in the app. For example, say you're working on a shopping app. After a user successfully makes a purchase, your client may want them to be returned to the home screen of the app rather than just one screen back in the nav stack. And this document is the place to make all those transitions clear. Also, if as developers we have this information early, we can often use our experience in mobile UX to offer suggestions to designers that are maybe less experienced that will possibly improve user experience. We want a specification of custom animations. So in iOS, some animations actually come for free with the operating system, but generally animations are, they definitely can be time consuming and difficult to implement, so they really need to be specified in advance. Obviously, when you transition between screens, iOS gives you out-of-the-box animations for those transitions, so for pushing, popping, presenting. And we're used to seeing these in every app, we expect them. However, if your client wants a custom animation, either on a single screen or as a transition between screens, you really need to know this in advance so that you can allocate time to implementing it. Additionally, if an animation or transition is non-trivial, it's generally best to also ask for a video or a mock-up of exactly how your designer expects this animation or transition to look when it's complete. Another thing worth noting is if you're using standard iOS elements, for example the flat buttons, then affordances such as touchdown state and disabled state come for free with the operating system, and it's relatively likely that they're going to continue working between releases of iOS as well without requiring extra development work. So, a little earlier I said that I can't use Photoshop and that I don't have a use for designs in their raw form. But I was kind of fibbing. I can use Photoshop a little bit, but I generally don't tell people that because it only ever causes me trouble. obviously, it is really useful if you have raw access, if you have access to your raw design files. For example, the designer you're working with might have missed cutting out an asset. They've gone on leave. It may be easier for you to just fire open Photoshop and get the asset yourself rather than waiting for them. But obviously, again, this is dependent on the design tools and flow that your designer uses and whether you have access to those tools and you're experienced enough to use them. But having raw design files can help. It's good to have the option. It's important to know about fonts in advance. iOS ships with a large number of free standard fonts. If your clients use any of these, you won't have to ask for font files because they're already installed on every iOS device. There's a full listing at that URL on the screen. If your client uses any non-native fonts in their app, they should provide them as TTF files only. It's possible for us as developers to use third-party tools to convert between font formats, but sometimes it doesn't work. It generally causes hassle. It's best if they're provided up front. So designers generally understand what's required, read the design of an app icon, but I think there's still a few additional bits of information that you can pass on to ensure that you're both on the same page. Obviously, before an app can be uploaded to the App Store, the icon files have to be embedded in the bundle. If an app is missing any of these icon files or screenshots for the App Store when it's uploaded, Apple will just reject that upload. So it's important that your designers know that corners are automatically rounded on app icons. Apple applies this effect so they won't have to. And transparency isn't supported at all for app icons. Any transparency in an app icon will be rendered by iOS as solid black. Apple maintains a list of exactly which icon files should be provided for each device that your app might be running on. And I recommend that you provide this link to your designers and clients so that they can see exactly what images they're supposed to provide at which resolutions. The splash screen's obviously the first thing that your users are going to see when they open your app, so it's important to get this right early. Apps generally appear to load faster if they use a blank version of the app's UI, just as if it hadn't finished loading its data yet. You're going to need to ask your clients and designers to provide you with a version of this for every screen resolution that their app supports, including landscape on iPad, minus 20 points at the top for the status bar. And again, Apple rejects apps without launch images. Finally, a suspiciously long way down this list is the actual digital image assets. So obviously your client's going to need to provide you with a set of external image assets that are used throughout the app, which is every image that's used on every screen of the app. So to support all the major iOS devices, which now I think all have Retina displays, we require images at two resolutions. We need them at 2x and at 3x. So remember the iPhone 5 has a Retina display that runs at 640 by 1136 pixels, which we access at a logical resolution of 320 by 568 points. So if we add a button on one of our screens of size 30 by 30 points with a custom icon, the icon image is going to be displayed at 2x Retina resolution, which is 60 by 60 pixels. When it runs on the iPhone 4, 5 or 6, and it's going to be shown at 3x resolution, which is 90 by 90 pixels on the iPhone 6 Plus. Fixed animations in iOS are often done using a set of still ping images where each image contains exactly one frame of the animation. These images should be named sensibly and they should be suffixed with their sequence number. For example, we want to see animated button 1.ping, animated button 2.ping, all the way up to the end of the sequence. It's also handy as developers to know the animation period. For example, we want to know that an animation should perform one full loop exactly every 2 seconds. And to make sure that your designers ensure that this period is an integral fraction of the screen's refresh rate, which is generally 60 Hertz. Finally, if your app includes any audio assets, obviously these are going to need to be provided ahead of time. I generally recommend that any audio is provided in AAC format. However, audio design is complicated, and this may not be the best solution for your client's needs. So, for example, if their app needs to play large amounts of audio, or they need to play multiple sounds at the same time, or they need audio rendered with extremely low latency, then it's best to get in touch with them very early to discuss the best way to proceed. If your client has these specific requirements, though, they're probably going to be pretty on the ball about all that stuff. So, now we've looked at everything, I think it's kind of crucial to get in the design spec before development starts. If you're a designer here today, then hopefully you'll be able to put this stuff to use in your own workflows. And for the developers, hopefully you've now got a bit of a better idea of the conversations that you can start to have with designers and clients before the development process starts. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to the DevWorld committee for having me today and putting on another excellent conference. There's a list of resources that you may find useful there. The slide deck will be available online shortly. And please feel free to come and have a chat with me during the conference. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Do you find that giving them that wall to get past is enough for you to lose the job sometimes?
So the question was, is this design spec possibly too much work for a client to be interested in dealing with you with? I think it's complicated, and my boss has a bit of a different opinion to me. It depends on how desperate you are for the work. I find that clients that don't want to provide this sort of information are generally not particularly desirable to work with. And again, it depends on whether you're doing a fixed cost quote or a time and materials. If it's time and materials, then sure, if specs change, if this stuff isn't provided and it needs to be redone later, then that's fine because it's billable. But if you're working on a fixed cost project and you don't have this sort of information up front, it can be quite risky to take on that project because I'm sure you've probably had experiences with specs changing, scope changing. It can be a big pain. But again, it's I guess also client relations and kind of passing through this information in a more friendly format.
So are there any applications out there that make this process a bit easier, provide annotations?
For a designer?
Yeah.
So the question was, are there any apps out there that make this process easier for a designer? I'm not entirely sure. As I say, I'm a developer, I'm not a designer. I think that, so for example, Sketch. Sketch makes a lot of this stuff simple to generate and export. Are there any designers in the room that would like to take this question?
Sorry, I take the question.
Yeah.
I use Sketch a lot, and it's much easier to export all those stuff. And then if I design the app and develop the app, I don't even need to export it because I can open Sketch file and whatever I need, I can get all the measurement dimensions from Sketch file and all the color pickup from Sketch directory. So I don't need to do all the steps like Spec. And because Sketch file is your spec, so you can pass the Sketch file to the developer, and the developer can pick up all those they need, and then just and even they can export the XX to PDF, and then directly import into Xcode.
Have you ever used that one? You should.
Yeah.
So I noticed you had a slide to explain resolutions from paint code,
Mm.
and then went on to describe all the different resolutions you have to export. Have you ever used paint code or any vector graphics to avoid that problem?
I haven't, because I don't build designs. I don't do design, I guess. So I obviously don't use paint code myself. The designer at my office does use Zeppelin, and he does use Sketch, and he does use vector formats when possible. I guess for me and us as developers, it's more annoying when we're working on a project and we receive an icon file at only one resolution, and then we have to fight with tools that we don't really understand to make that work and resize that. But yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of tools available.
Question. I particularly liked the part at the beginning when I found promise in that you were talking about specs in particular, and I found that absolutely, especially recently, I've been finding that it's really hard to get really clear grasp on what the designers want when it comes to things like animations or how they want things to lay out, or edge cases that we might have to infer, as you were mentioning from the pig. How strict do you find that you are, or that following these sort of steps with each of these individual bits that you are talking about? How strict do you find that you have to be when it comes to, have you thought about this edge case? Where do you draw the line where you say, okay, I'll take this and I'll start with this, and then I'll come back to you when I run into issues?
So the question was, I think, how strict do we have to be about getting these specs beforehand, and how strict do we have to be with demanding that they're perfect before development starts?
Right.
And it's an excellent question, and the answer is obviously not strict at all. I guess this is a really basic starting point, and having designers and developers think about this sort of stuff beforehand is, I think, where most of the utility comes from. Obviously, it takes a long time to develop an app. When you're working on a project, there's always edge cases that designers miss and that don't actually come up until often the app is being used by real people. So as it's being developed, or it's suddenly being filled with real data that doesn't fit. So I think it's definitely important to keep that line of communication quite open and quite amenable to modifications as they need to come up. But it is really annoying when none of this sort of stuff has been thought about by the design team beforehand. Great. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. I think we'll wrap it up.